Welcome back. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. We're taking your calls at 855-236-3228. That's 855-236-3228. Hey, Jeremy, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Jeremy.
Hi, Ben. Just a quick question for you. I wonder if you could, I think the Posse Comitatus Act is a little bit murky for people, and I would like for you to maybe explain how, if Trump were to try to enforce a national lockdown order, how that would come into effect if federal troops were deployed. Could you explain that a little bit?
So Congress has to explicitly authorize the U.S. military to enforce U.S. domestic laws. And the Posse Comitatus Act makes clear that the president can't unilaterally just say, okay, Army, I want you to go enforce a national lockdown. That can't happen in the absence of congressional approval for such action. Now, what the government can do is obviously mobilize in support of civilian agencies like FEMA. And typically what you have is governors making requests for that sort of stuff. Also, the National Guard and Coast Guard, those can be activated, but only if asked by a state governor. The Stafford Act, the National Emergencies Act, usually the president will activate these things and he'll say, okay, basically these are ready for governors to come request things. And then the governors request things. And then the U.S. government can get involved. But it does require the states to basically be okay with it. And so the idea that Trump can just declare a broad national lockdown, he's got pretty broad authority, but he can't just use the U.S. military to enforce a broad national lockdown. He can sort of request one. And I guess that would be what people are asking for. But that's about it.
So one more question then. If he did, then what are the steps required and what would it look like?
So let's say that Trump said, I'm now issuing a broad mandatory national lockdown. Well, if there is a state like Texas and they said, we're not going to abide by your national lockdown, it would be very difficult in the absence of there's no authority in the president in the absence of congressional action for the Army to go enforce that lockdown. It just can't happen. It's not something that is allowed constitutionally speaking. Now, he could theoretically go to Congress and say, I need an act that will force Texas to go along with this and that will give me the authorization to use the Army in order to enforce this law. But I think it's pretty unlikely that most states would go along with that or most Congress people would go along with that. It's a radical expansion of presidential power that has never before been considered under the Constitution in the absence of outright declarations of war by states against the federal government, which is what happened during the Civil War.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ben. I appreciate you clearing that up for me.
Yeah, you bet. Don't worry about President Trump authorizing the national military to come and sit on your street. You'd have to have your governor actually approve something in that order. Worry more about your governor than the president is, I guess, what the point that I am making. Okay, David in Ohio, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, David.
Hey, Ben. How's it going? My question's...
it's going okay.
Simple.
How are you?
I'm great. I'm great, actually. My question is pretty simple for you. The fact is, with Trump having sent out millions of dollars to the small businesses, they pretty much have gotten their money right away. And unemployment is, as you know, overwhelmed. Severely, severely overwhelmed. We're 3 weeks behind, actually. And my wife and I have not been paid. But yet they have not sent out stimulus. Do you think that it's wrong not to put the people first?
Well, the problem is the mechanism for the distribution of the cash, David. And this is, again, it actually comes down to one of the major failings of public sector versus private sector. So the unemployment systems have been understaffed, undermanned, and overwhelmed by the fact that you now have literally tens of millions of people who are now filing for unemployment and then waiting for their checks. Because the Small Business Administration lends through banks, and banks are deliberately staffed to deal with these sorts of loans, they've been able to really ramp up their facility quite quickly. Private production, it turns out, is quite good at this, and public sector is really not particularly good at this, especially because there's no incentive to do it extraordinarily well other than, a sense of community. So would I prefer that all the checks went out like day one? Absolutely, right? I think we're all on the same page there. Nobody wants Trump doesn't want it. The states don't want it. The unemployment offices don't want it. Like nobody is sitting there going, it'd be great is if we could hold up somebody's unemployment check for another 2 months. And nobody's interested in doing that. The question is, what is the facility and flexibility for these offices to actually get those checks out? The system for unemployment has been hit with 10 million. There's also a difference in numbers here, right? Which is that when 10 million people file for unemployment simultaneously, that is radically going to overwhelm the system in a way that even tens of thousands of businesses filing with their banks for loan extensions is not going to operate, right? The numbers are just too dissimilar, and the private industry side of it is indeed more efficient. There was worry, by the way, that the loans weren't going to go out to those companies fast enough, even the first couple of days that the Small Business Administration loan program was launched. So it's not unique to the public sector. It's just a lot worse.
I understand. I'm just, the American
listen, I'm
public is
frustrated.
concerned
Listen,
about paying their
everyone
taxes
has a
like
right to be
bills.
frustrated. Everybody has a right to be frustrated. The government forcibly shut down the entire economy, and now you're waiting to be backfilled. And like, how long is this going to last? Nobody is saying. The data is not out there. The experts are not providing any road plan for getting out of this. They're not giving us any metric where they say, okay, once we get to this number of deaths per day or this number of infections per day, then such and such group can go back to work. Like there's no plan. Nobody has articulated anything. And in the absence of a plan and in the absence of money, things are going to get ugly real fast. They better get those checks out damn straight, like right now, yesterday. I really appreciate your call. Hang in there, dude. The checks are coming, but we got to get this country back up and running sooner rather than later. Alrighty, more coronavirus updates coming to you ASAP. Plus, we're going to be talking with Senator Rick Scott from Florida in the next hour, all about what exactly the federal government should do to reopen this thing. What are the standards that should be used when we talk about how to reopen all of this, all the latest from New York, because the information continues to flow forth. We will have all of your updates on a moment-to-moment basis. You're listening to The Ben Shapiro Show.